Hey guys, it's Troy and I'm here with a question and answer video. If you recall, if you saw my giveaway video that I did recently, one of the things I had suggested for a topic in order to enter the giveaway was ask a question. And I can probably use some of those in my upcoming video that I'll do a Q&A video. So here it is. So let's go ahead and get into some of those questions. Some of them are a little more involved than others, but I'll do my best. So, Daniel asks, what is the least favorite pen in your collection and why? That's kind of a hard question, and I'm not dodging that question. But the truth of the matter is, I don't think there's any one particular pen that I really hate more than any other. There are a bunch of them I do not particularly care for. There are some pens that are vintage that I just did not like. I could not get to write. They were cheap garbage. They were horribly manufactured. I've got some modern pens that are the same way. I've got a bunch of pens sitting in a drawer here behind me that require fixing. And some of those are modern. Some of those are older. There are a bunch of pens that I have received that supposedly were even refurbished that write horrifically. I've got a bunch of them that are really not favorites and I really don't like, either because they require some service and they shouldn't, or they're just horrible, horrible pens. And I don't have any one in particular. When you've got pens in the hundreds in your collection like I've got, I don't know if I've got any one that stands out as being my absolute least favorite. I've got some that other people absolutely love, and I am not impressed. Lamy Dialogue 3 is a good example. Mine, not happy with it. Don't like the way it writes, and I cannot get it to write very well. Other people love the Lamy Dialogue 3. I wanted to love it. I just can't get mine to write very well. So I've got a lot of pens that are like that in my collection that just didn't quite live up to expectation. And therefore they are definitely not amongst my favorites. I hope that's a complete answer for you. And like I said, it's not just one. The other danger to that, when you've got a particular pen that you say, this is my least favorite, you're going to get some tomatoes thrown at you by people who are fans. But that's not why I'm not answering it with a single specific pen. It's just, I'm asked all the time, do you have a favorite of this? Do you have a favorite of that? And there are some that, no, not really. For instance, my next question that I get from Larry's Fountain Pens, from my buddy Larry down in Fort Worth, Texas. What's one of my favorite songs? Well, Larry, I don't know if you're asking if I know what one of your favorite songs is. And if it is, I would say it's either something by the Doors or the Beatles. But what are some of my favorite songs? Okay, since it's a personal question, believe it or not, let me preface this. I grew up in the 80s, 70s and 80s, and big hair heavy metal are some of my favorites from the 1980s. Been to a lot of concerts, and Judas Priest, AC/DC, Poison. I could go on and on. A lot of great songs that are out there. And I don't have one particular song that I go, this is my all-time favorite song, or even my all-time favorite band. I've got a group of bands that I really, really like, and I listen to a lot of their stuff over and over, and every band has some songs that are better than others. But if I had to pick one song above all others, knowing what I just told you, would you be surprised that it's a Barry Manilow song? I'll admit, I'm pretty eclectic. I mean, in my music collection, you look at my iPod, you're going to find classical, a few country, not many because I'm not a huge country fan. You're going to find, you're really not going to find much rap, but you're going to find rock. You're going to find really some pop, a really wide variety, a fairly eclectic mix. But I'm a fan of low. I've really always liked Barry Manilow, and he has this one song I Made It Through the Rain. And the lyrics to that song are what make it for me. And the way that he sang it, with the power that's behind it, the message that it conveys, that's probably my all-time favorite song. British Steel, Judas Priest, United. That's one of my favorite songs. Believe it or not, the beginning to Enter Sandman. That's one of my favorites as far as an opening riff. I'll put a link to some YouTube videos of some of my favorites, but I think my number one song is Barry Manilow, I Made It Through the Rain. Just go figure. Let's see. Another Larry asks, do you prefer converters or piston fillers? I like them both. I do have a penchant or a preference probably for piston fillers for two reasons. Number one, they tend to be better quality pens. I'm talking once you get up to like Pelican, and you get on that level, Mont Blanc, you're starting to get better quality pens. And they typically write better, and they typically have a better ink capacity. They're not always easier to clean. Pelicans are, because you can unscrew the nib. Any pen that you can unscrew the nib and clean out the inside of that barrel, like an old Esterbrook lever filler. Yep, Pelicans. I just did a bunch of pen cleaning over the course of just like a couple of days, and I was cleaning Esterbrooks, and I was cleaning Pelicans, and I was cleaning lever fillers, and and a bunch of converter pens. So I'd say probably piston fillers are more what I prefer. And I understand why cartridge converter pens are popular, and they're easy to maintain and they're easy to clean. Let's see. Which Waterman pen is your most favorite pen, and which is the oldest one in your collection? Asks Stefan Feinen. Most favorite pen, and which is the oldest in my collection? Hold on just a sec, I'll get them out for you. Alright, now let's start with the oldest first, and that would probably be this one. This is a dip pen from the late 1800s by Warren Manufacturing. I was able to find this one at an antique store. The town that I live in has a lot of antique shops, and this particular one was from like 1895, somewhere in there. It is a dip pen. It was pretty much, it's almost like paper or cardboard tubing that was rolled up, and it's just got a metal nib shoved into it. Fairly inexpensive, and in its day, and probably looks to have been disposable at one point. So that's probably the oldest. Aside from that, some of the other oldest that I've got are like a Waterman 20 from circa 1905 or so, I am told. 1910s are a couple of Waterman 12s that are in my collection. As far as favorites, it's not like I'm doing Applebaum's top 3 pens, but I've got at least 2 of them that are here, and I've got probably a third selection that I would choose. But some of my personal favorites, going back to Waterman Edison. Awesome pen. I've got 2 Waterman Edsons, and this one is my favorite of the 2. And then there's this one. It's a Conway Stewart Churchill. Great writing pen. It's a fairly recent addition to my collection, and it became one of my favorites as soon as I started to use it. So that Waterman Edson and that Churchill by Conway Stewart, both modern pens, are probably 2 of my favorites. I do have some that are in my favorites that are vintage, but those are probably right up there in some of my favorites. Sean Thomas asks, do you prefer newer pens or vintage pens, and why? Sean, I'm eclectic on that too. I love older vintage pens. I love the history behind them. I love old Schaefers, old flat top Schaefers, lever fillers. I love old Esterbrooks because of how iconic they are, and it's what I cut my teeth on, so to speak, learning how to service and to repair pens. Also, I have got some really great writing antique Watermens in my collection, some great vintage, from various vintage Conklins, and those are just fantastic pens. But I've got some modern ones that I like as well. I've got a soft spot for vintage only because of the history that goes into them, the fact that a lot of people on YouTube totally omit and overlook them and only look at modern pens, and I kind of like the breadth of them. So I've always got a soft spot just because there's so many great brands that were manufactured that are out there that are available for people to be able to check out, to be able to fix up, to be able to use. The breadth of the designs and the filling systems, I really have a soft spot for all of those. Just the sheer historicity of it all. But also, there are a lot of modern pens that I like. There's some things about modern pens I don't like, in that pretty much you've got Bach and Jovo nibs in general for anything that's not an in-house manufactured nib for a particular brand. So that kind of limits the variety that you can get. But I love, as you probably just saw, for my favorite pens in my collection, I like modern ones too, and there's some great modern ones out there. You just have to find them and experiment a little bit. Doug Gonzalez asks this question: have you found that your son takes more time and thinks more as he writes when using a fountain pen? That is, does it slow him down a bit? That's kind of a double-edged question. Number one, he does slow down a little bit when he writes with one. However, he rarely writes with one anymore, not because of not wanting to use fountain pens compared to regular pens, or I say regular, I mean like ballpoints or even pencils. But the fact that in school they don't assign homework anymore. Everything seems to be done digitally on a computer, and forms that he fills out on a website, that kind of thing for school, and he never does penmanship for school ever. All three of my sons, unfortunately, are being taught the same way. They're not being taught cursive. They're not being taught how to hold, grip, and use any kind of writing utensil. They're not taught penmanship whatsoever. And as such, he, believe it or not, when Matthew was in first and second grade, he had more homework than he's got now. And especially with this whole COVID-19 lockdown thing and remote learning, they do almost nothing where he has to write much of anything. So unfortunately, he rarely uses a pen, though he does tell me that, Dad, no, I still love my pens and I still want to use them. He just doesn't have much occasion to use them. Me, on the other hand, I'm kind of old school, and I still use pens on a regular basis here at my desk. I wrote something out today, and I had to sign something, and I handwrite letters. I still keep an analog checkbook, that kind of thing. I take notes for work, etc., and I still make sure that I use pens. Whereas him, not quite so much. James Chesney, what is your favorite high-end pen? Well, I kind of showed those already. Sorry for the redundant question. But that Conway Stewart and that Waterman Edison are definitely two of my favorite high-end pens. And sorry for having already answered that one. Matthew Duran, what other things do you collect? Interesting question. People who collect stuff usually have more than one thing that they collect. And quite honestly, before I met my wife, I used to collect firearms. I am still a U.S. government licensed curio and relic collector, although I have really not done the collecting that I used to do. I used to go to gun shows every single weekend. I used to go to the gun range on a regular basis, a time or two a week. I used to have stuff shipped to my door. I used to be regularly purchasing, and I've slowed that down for a couple of reasons. One, while we were dating, I put more money and effort into that relationship than I did into the hobby. Number two, I had already amassed the stuff that really interested me. So there wasn't quite as much left that were really on my hit list. I still have a few items that I have yet to obtain in that collection that I would love to have. That doesn't mean I have any less interest. Work has changed quite a bit as well, so I don't often have the opportunity that I used to have. But beyond that, we collect movies, I think. Got more DVDs probably than should be allowed by law. I've got more DVDs than Blockbuster used to have when they were in business, kind of thing. Just because I could. I've collected some books of interest over the years. I actually used to own a used bookstore. I used to sell exclusively online. And I've got more books than I will ever read here at home of specific topics and interests. So those are the things I have collected. Right now I'm pretty much focused on this. What pens do you currently own that you will never part with? Asks James Eck. Well, James, pretty much just about all of them. Anything that's of decent value, just the sheer intrinsic value makes me hold on to them, number one. Number two, I want to be able to pass those on to the next generation. Number three, I keep most of my pens for reference because every so often I'll get somebody who asks me about a pen or a comparison between a pen. So I keep a lot of them in my collection. I seldom part with them. I have over the years, only a couple of them have I let go. I generally don't sell them. I generally give them away when I do part with them. But I've got some of the same pens I just showed earlier in this video. I probably will never part with those. A lot of vintage stuff that I've got. There are some that are sentimental value, that are my first ones I ever used. Waterman Filius, I've got one that I will probably never get rid of because it was my very first fountain pen, other than a cheap cartridge filler that I picked up that's also in my collection that I cleaned up and got working again, and probably will never part with it because they were the first ones I ever used, and that Filius I used for like 20 plus years. I'll probably never part with those. Other Filiuses I've got in my collection, I have given some away. I've got more than Filiuses than I know what to do with. But I still use them, and some of those I may give away eventually. But those ones that I spoke of that are firsts, and I kind of have a soft spot for those. A little bit of memorabilia, so to speak, from my time collecting them or getting my interest. I will probably never part with those. Someone calling themselves Poor Typist asks, other than fountain pens, what are some of your interests? Well, things that interest me. Two of the big things, politics and religion, believe it or not, they interest me. Theology interests me. I've got a lot of studying that I've done over the years, and prayer time, study time, reading, theology, specifically in Christendom, though I am open to learning about other world religions, not necessarily, I will never practice them. Cults, those kinds of things, I will read up on them, but basically theology. So politics and religion. Politics have interested me since I was young. I remember sitting and reading the Manchester Union Leader, which always had an editorial that began on the front page, and I remember reading that when I was growing up and following news stories, and I used to get involved in youth government programs, boys' state, things like that as I was growing up. I've had radio talk shows. I've had television talk shows. I was a newspaper columnist. I was a blogger. And those topics, those are things that I would write about on a regular basis. And especially when I was doing the newspaper column, I was asked to do locally oriented materials. And so I would make comments about municipal, county, state politics in situations. I kind of wish I could step back into radio. I miss doing radio. Talk radio especially is one of my favorite formats that I've ever participated in or listened to. And I would love to be able to step back into broadcasting rather than doing a lot of behind the scenes and engineering kind of work. So those are things that I wouldn't mind getting back into. And I've really considered doing podcasting again. I used to have a regular podcast where I had topics of politics and religion and interviews and that sort of thing. I've seriously thought about creating another YouTube channel where that's what I do, politics and religion, whatever interests me kind of thing. So those are some of my other interests. Obviously family, spending time with my family, enjoying a good movie or a good TV show with my wife, and just enjoying my spouse and my kids. All right, the next question comes from Theo D. And this is an interesting one that I have no answer for. How come the Parker 51 fountain pen is not advertised on the Parker's official website? You would think that it would be. When you're having a launch of a product like the Parker 51 with some of the hype that's been going on, a brand new product, you'd think that you would market it because it's being distributed by distributors all over the world, that you would actually have it on your website. But it's not. I've been there. I looked at it. Very good question. I would be upset if I actually worked for that company or was management in that company and it wasn't on the website. Graham Parr asks a pretty good question. And I told him so and said I'd be answering it on this video. He says, I watch a lot of pen reviewers and have come upon the description, a fine writing instrument. Can you tell me at what point does a fountain pen become a fine writing instrument? Pretty good question. The answer, however, is a little subjective. It's not so objective where there is a set description. So I'm going to have to answer it my way, not as a marketing way, okay? But in my definition, in my terms, a fine writing instrument is something that, number one, has an intrinsic value. That you have a pen that actually is worth something. There are really low-cost pens that write well, but there's some upper-end pens that write great. And, you know, you've got horrible writing ones in between, all right? But, number one, there's an intrinsic value to it. Number two, quality. It's quality made. Craftsmanship went into it. The materials that went into it are well done, well performed, well put together. Three, it writes very well. Like I said a little bit earlier, I've got pens on the upper end that write fantastically well. I got some upper end pens, not so much, that their manufacturers may have called them a fine writing instrument. I don't consider those necessarily fine writing if they don't write well. Also, is it something that I want to keep in my collection and use repeatedly? Is it something that I want to be able to hand down to the next generation? Is it legacy worthy? Those factors together, to me, make a fine writing instrument. So, does that answer your question? Hopefully it does. So for me, it's intrinsic value, it's quality, it writes well, quality materials, it's well built. So those would be my definition of what makes a fine writing instrument, not just some marketing slogan. The next question is from one of my longtime viewers, Abdiel Acosta, who's from the Miami area and is a pretty good artist. So, and what I'll try to remember to do is to put a link down to his Instagram page and to his Etsy store, so you can check out his artwork and maybe get some for your own self. We have a couple of pieces of his artwork here in our home, and hopefully you can enjoy it too. But he asks this. But first makes the statement, I know you're a big Waterman fan. What is the Waterman pen that excites you the most out of your collection? Okay, actually I've already shown you guys in this video one of those pens, and there are actually two of them. Not just one, but there's two that excite me the most. One is vintage, one is modern. I already showed you the modern Waterman Edison. This is absolutely one of my favorite modern pens, probably one of my 3 favorite pens in my collection. And I have not just this one, but I've got one in the Boucheron edition as well. So I've got the Sapphire and the Boucheron. I actually like the nib on the Sapphire better than I like the nib on the Boucheron because this is a fine nib, and I think this medium nib actually writes better for me than does this, but I absolutely love this color and this scheme and the design of the look on the Boucheron. So that was one of my first big grail pens, was this one right here. And so that's one, and that's on the modern side. On the vintage side is another one that was a grail pen of mine, and that is the Waterman 58. The first time I saw a 58, probably from the 1920s with the red ripple, was at a pen show in DC. I think, was this one in DC or was this one Raleigh? I don't remember. I think it was DC, and I absolutely loved the 58. So I got this one, big, beautiful number 8 nib on it. And this one actually is flexy. It has very flexible nib. But on top of that, from the same seller, by the way, antiquedigger.com, 10% off your purchases, use discount code Troy. But another Waterman 58, and I absolutely love the nib on this one. This is a rigid manifold nib. And I just cleaned this one, believe it or not, like yesterday or today. Yesterday, I think, I cleaned this particular pen out since it had run out of ink and I had to clean it out. So those are the 2 Waterman pens in my collection that excite me the most. Now, 2 models, okay, not necessarily 2 individual pens. Obviously, you just saw 4 of them, but the 2 models that excite me the most, one modern, one vintage. And those are some of my favorite, most exciting Watermans to me. Roddy Fowler asks the question, what is the longest pen you have seen? I can remember having one that was nearly twice as long as the normal pen back in the 70s, but I can't even remember the name of it. Well, for me personally, the longest pen I've ever seen is this one. An actual functioning pen, not one of those big store display ones. An actual functioning pen. This one right here. This one belongs to my son Matthew. He picked that up at the Raleigh Pen Show, and actually it is a ballpoint. It is a ballpoint pen, a clickable ballpoint, and it's an actual usable pen. But as far in terms of fountain pens, I showed you earlier this one here, which is the Waterman 20. Big old honkin' baby. But that is one of the longest ones that I've ever seen, touched, used, felt. So there you go. And I'm sure there's some bigger ones than that or longer ones than that, but those are the ones that are in my collection and some of the biggest that I know of. Nancy Molosky asks this one. How does the Waterman JIF compare to the Allure, sometimes also referred to as the Graduate, that's sold here? Well, she's in Canada. So up in Canada, there, eh? Land of my ancestors, Canada. All right, well, let's take a look at some of those pens. She says as the Allure or the Graduate. I have actually one of each of those, and the Waterman JIF in several forms. Keep in mind, when the Waterman JIF is mentioned, it is not just a particular model of pen. It is a group or a class of pens, it seems, in all the reading that I've done within Waterman, or at least on the pens that I've got. So, here we go. This is the Allure, and this is the Graduate. And they are extremely similar, if not the exact same pen. You got the exact same clip, exact same top. You've got a different cap band here on the bottom. Very similar. Alright, now you uncap them both, and they've got both a very similar nib to them. So I'm going to put the caps back on them real quick. These are low-end pens. The Allure I found actually sometimes a few dollars more than the Graduate. Graduate a little more mass-produced and readily available here in the US of A. Now, I'm going to throw in this pen. into the mix. This is a Waterman JIF, and was actually labeled for sale as the JIF, the J-I-F, Jules Isidore Fagard. I've done a video on the Waterman JIF, and I shared a link to that in my giveaway video. I'll try to put up another link here as well. But you can see it's actually plastic compared to the metal bodies of these other two pens, but a clip very similar. The top, you can see, instead of you've got that groove in the top, you've got just a flat plastic. And at the bottom, very similar, albeit in plastic. You take off the nib, and take off the top to show the nib, and you can see that it is actually very similar. The section about the same length, obviously different construction materials, slightly different shape. And you've got the same kind of flare here, but slightly different in the shape thereof. The nib, you both have steel nibs, very similar looking steel nibs, both cartridge converter pens. Now, I'm going to throw in one more. The same kind of JIF I was giving away. And like I said, it's more of a class of pen than a specific model. So, in the research that I have been doing, I've seen JIFs, pens just like that was labeled a JIF. Pens that look just like this, labeled a JIF. So, as I can gather, the lower class or the lower student versions of pens tend to be lumped into a class called the JIF. And you can see how they stand up against both the Graduate and the Allure. So, these three very similar, slightly different here, but there you go. So hopefully you've got a decent comparison there, all at a fairly low price range. The Graduate I've seen $20 or so, depending upon from where you get it. The Allure, it really depends, because you kind of have to find those on eBay. The JIF I've seen as low as $6 and up. Because it's plastic and construction, mass-produced more in Europe than here in the States. And I saved a big long list of questions for last. Labib Saoud, I don't know if I pronounced your name right. I apologize if I got it wrong, but I'm going to try to answer your questions best I can. Been waiting for this. Casually watched your video since last year, and here are some I've been meaning to ask, and if you don't mind, I'd love to hear your son's answer on some as well, since they have a different thought process to adults, and also it'd be interesting to compare it to yours. Okay. Number one, when did you realize you had a lot of pens, more than you needed? As to more than I needed, I can answer that first, after I ordered my second fountain pen. Quite honestly, I only need one, and I had one that I used exclusively for like 2 decades. So when I ordered another pen after that, it was more than I needed. When did I realize I had a lot? When I had to upgrade my storage. I had a pen case that held about a dozen of them that I had purchased, and when I outgrew that and had to move up to a bigger storage, then I said, okay, I'm starting to get a little bigger on my collection. And then when I had to move in from there up to drawers to put them in a bigger class of storage, that's when I realized, yeah, that's more than I need. And when I'm classifying them and cataloging them in a spreadsheet, and suddenly I'm over 400 of them, and I go, yeah, I got a lot of pens. Paper, pen, or ink? Of the three, do you spend most on, and which do you think you should spend more instead? Okay, for me, I spend the most on pens, because I like the variety of pens. I like to be able to try different pens and different colors, different sizes, different manufacturers, different filling systems, old ones, new ones. For me, I enjoy the craftsmanship that goes into them. There are people I know who hand make them. So personally, I spend a lot more on pens than I do on anything else. Probably the least on that list for me is paper. I use ordinary notepads a lot. I do spend some on some decent paper, but to me it's not a big thing. Yes, I get the feathering, I get the bleeding on an ordinary notepad from my local office supply store. Or on some of these notebooks like, these marbled composition books. Yeah, okay. They're not the greatest for fountain pen use. But still, I'm not a paper snob. Inks, I've liked a lot of different inks. I've tried a lot of different colors. I often try to match the color of the pen to the color of the ink just for fun. My wife is the same way. She likes pretty pinks, and she likes all different colors of inks. Purples. Pinks and purples are her two favorites. So inks would be second. Which paper do you love writing on the most is question number 3. I've got a Clairefontaine spiral bound notepad that I think I like the best of all the pads that I've got. Rhodia dot pads and line pads, they're not bad. I mean, they're most plentiful. They're easiest for me to get, so I do use those and write on those a lot. Not all my pens like Rhodia. They tend to like the Clairefontaine pad that I got, that I've been using a lot more lately. And I haven't really done a lot of Apica or haven't done a lot of Tomaway River so much. But I know a lot of people who do like them. So that Clairefontaine pad I've got is probably my favorite that I've had thus far. Question number 4. Ever regretted selling or giving away a pen? And if so, which was it, and why did you sell or give it away? Yes, there is one particular pen that comes to mind first, that I gave to somebody. I gave away a Pelican, and I've given away several Pelicans and Lamis and that kind of thing. But there's one particular individual I gave a Pelican, not a high-end Pelican, but... and it was just that they didn't really seem to appreciate it, and didn't really even thank me for it, kind of thing. Yeah, I would rather have had that back in my collection, if that was going to be the case. But that would be about the only one I've really regretted. I've given away some decent pens. There was one, I broke up a set of 4 that I had and gave it to a friend of mine. And do I wish that I kind of had that one pen back with that set that I had purchased? Yes and no. I've got 3 others, and they weren't all matching. They just all happened to be with the same logo on it, kind of thing. But let's see. Number 5. The pen brand you feel made the best pens back in the day. Depends on what back in the day is, and how you would classify that. Back in the day, 1920s is what I look at as, to me, the vintage heyday. 1920s, I absolutely love the Watermen hard rubber pens. For the Red Ripple, one of the ones I really love is this blue and olive ripple desk pen that I keep by Watermen. I showed you a little bit ago a Waterman 58 in Red Ripple, and then the BCHR. I really enjoy the 1920s Watermans. To me, those are some of the best that were ever made out there, and just happen to be my personal favorites. You get into the 1940s, there were some really nice Parkers. But I also, when you start talking, let's say 1930s or so, Schaefer flat tops. Absolutely love some Schaefer flat tops. I got a couple of oversized Schaefer flat tops. Absolutely love from the 1930s, lever fillers. So, basically Schaefer and Waterman, and a couple of Parkers thrown in there. Number 6, resin, celluloid, ebonite, and steel. Which of these is best suited for a body of a pen if you plan to make one a family hand-me-down? I'll be honest with you, if you take care of them, any of the above. I just mentioned about the Red Ripple, basically the ebonite, the hard rubber. Those to me are going to be great hand-me-downs because, number one, I've got pens here sitting on my desk that are over 100 years old. that are still around, still functional. I'm able to write with them. It's like 1921. Well, guess what? This pen was made in the 1920s. So that's like a 100-year-old pen, and it's going to go to my sons. I've got pens here that are made out of acrylics that I'm going to be able to pass on to my kids. I've got some pens that are made in steel that you can run over probably with a car or a tank that can still be around. Then again, those are some cheap pens are made out of that same material, as well as some upper end pens. So it really depends on, I don't think there's any one particular material. You mentioned here celluloid. I've got celluloid pens here too that are fantastic. Some great pens from the 30s, 40s that are celluloid. So as far as a hand-me-down, all of my pens will eventually probably become hand-me-downs. But personally, I think the nice old ones that have been around for a long, long time. That is, if you're into being able to get antique pens. All right, so let's go on to number 7. Did you ever get into an argument with your family over your passion for collecting pens? And if so, how did you handle it? Nope, never did. Actually, everybody was pretty much on board with it. My wife has got a bunch of pens of her own. Matthew's got a bunch of his. He was kind of into the whole thing too. My youngest kind of likes fountain pens. He's got a couple of them that he doesn't really keep good track of. I don't think he even knows where some of those are. And my oldest never really had an interest so much. And I don't think he really cares one way or the other. But nope, never got into an argument with anybody over pens at all within my family. Number 8, the pen brand which shouldn't be making pens and which one shouldn't exist. Oh, gee whiz, looking at some of the old pens, if I was going to look at vintage, I run across some real stinkers in vintage. Imperials, some were just absolutely horrible and cheaply made. But nowadays, which one shouldn't exist? When you answer a question like this, you're going to run across people who are apologists for any particular brand that are out there. Some people love Chinese pens, some people hate them. Some people like European-made pens, some people not so much. Japanese, same way. But which one shouldn't exist? This is really hard to narrow down to a particular brand, but there are several brands out there. Any brand that exclusively makes rip-offs of other brands. You've got pens that are Lamy rip-offs. You've got pens that are Mont Blanc rip-offs. You've got pens that are Parker rip-offs. I've got a couple of Parkers here in my collection. Hold on. Let me reach right over here and get you one. Looking back here in my drawer, here is a great example. This is a Parker IM. Or is it? It's a fake Parker. I've got one in that exact same drawer that was a Parker Sonnet. Nope, not really. It's actually a ripoff. So any pen company that would brand their pens to be an exact copy or a replica of somebody else's work and pass it off as an original, those companies should not exist. Those piss me off, quite honestly. Especially if you're young in the hobby and you don't know any better. This one was one I bought just recently because I just was curious about if it was going to be any good. The IM, I was thinking, I wouldn't mind having a Parker IM. They're about $50. I found this for $9. I said, I'm dubious as to whether or not it's really legit. So I got it, looked at, and I said, the construction of it was actually halfway decent. It could pass as an IM, but then I started to compare to IMs online. Yep, nib's totally different. Yeah, it's a fake. And it actually wrote pretty well. Set it down for a little while, pick it up. No, it's crap. It kept stopping. So finally I just flushed it out without ever having used it. It wrote nicely when I first got it to write. So when you first ink it up, it's good. Companies like this, whatever company is making this, shame on you, and you shouldn't exist. Quite honestly. All right, number 9. Ever wanted a Condit bulk filler? You better believe it. It is literally on my wish list. And when I had some extra money here just recently, and I was looking at buying a nice expensive pen when I had like a bonus kind of thing coming my way, Conid had suspended manufacturing for a while. I don't know if it's because of the COVID shutdown or what, or just so back ordered that they had to make more. But yes, Conid bulk filler, absolutely on my wish list. What lesson, trait, or skill would you want to teach your son the most?
Conan, what is best in life? To crush your enemies, see them driven before you, and to hear the lamentation of your women. That is good.
Okay, no, really. I would want him, number one, follow after Jesus Christ. First and foremost, follow after Christ. Place your trust in God. First and foremost, period. Stick with what you know to be true. Stick with what you know are the principles that A, make your character great, B, made this country that we happen to live in great, C, make family great. Those are the principles I would want to pass on to my children. Integrity, honesty, follow after Christ with all your heart. Those are the traits that I really want to pass on to them. And I guess the next question is, because I've done some videos here with my son, Matthew. Your feelings when becoming a father. Let me give you a little bit of backstory so you can understand my answer. My beloved bride and I, this is a second marriage for us both. Wife version 1.0, as I call her. She did not have any children with me. We were married for 13 years, and we did not have any children out of that marriage. So along comes version 2.0, huge upgrade by the way. She was already a single mom, and she had a little boy who was only 4 years old at the time. Matter of fact, this picture right here is from our wedding day. It's one of my favorite pictures that I have anywhere. And matter of fact, he just turned 18. I was there for his 5th birthday. This photo was from when he was 5. Because I was already a part of his life for about a year, I was not necessarily daddy. He does still have a biological father in his life, but I enjoyed being a dad. I enjoyed being able to have a young mind, a young skull full of mush here in the household. And I had had a great time being an influence and a dad to this young boy. My wife and I got pregnant on our honeymoon. Yep, so Matthew was a honeymoon baby. And Matthew will be turning 12 years old this year. I had been wanting a child, a natural born child, since I was 18, 19. I'd always wanted a daughter. I grew up in a household full of sons. Boys ran in our family pretty heavily when I was growing up. Always wanted a daughter. Well, my wife had a boy already. We were kind of hoping for a little girl. Well, come to find out, no, we're pregnant with a little boy. Hey, we'll take him. We'll love him. We will be happy with him. In the next one, after 2 miscarriages, we had another little boy. But I can tell you that being there to witness the birth of my son was one of the 3 greatest moments of my life. Very emotional, very heartwarming. I already had an idea of the gravity of the situation, already having had a boy in the house, in terms of responsibility, in terms of my role, in keeping up a family. The things that I had for obligations, and quite honestly, some of the heartbreak that would come along with it. I already had an idea of all that, but being able to see my son actually come into this world, like I said, was one of the 3 greatest moments of my life. All right, the next question, 13 out of 18 questions. Advice for people new to fountain pens. You know, I kind of doodled down a list here. Number 1, ask questions. There are all kinds of Facebook groups and forums, pen clubs, and when they can start back up, pen shows. Don't be afraid to ask questions. And if you know somebody who's kind of an experienced collector, I've welcomed people emailing me, contacting me through social media and asking questions. And generally, I try to get back in touch with you. I can only remember one that I really just never got back in touch with because I got so busy I totally forgot. And I apologize for that. But don't be afraid to ask questions. Number 2, do some research. There's a lot of pen reviewers out there, and some of them have like top 10 lists. And those are a great place to start when you want to look at pens for research and collection. That usually people start on the low end. They start small. I did. Most everybody else did. So they're a good place to at least look and get ideas. And then do some research. You go to all these pen sellers. Good grief. Or you want vintage pens, go to gopens.com. You want to go for new pens, you can go to, and old pens for that matter, go to Peyton Street Pens. You can go to Van Ness Pens. You can go to Goulet and Anderson Pens. All these places, and go do some research. Gold Spot Pens, Pen Chalet. There's Colorado Pens. A lot of places out there that sell them. So do some research. You can look at reviews and stuff like that, and you can look at statistics, and you can look at prices, and you can see some really big disparities sometimes. For instance, I found that I bought at Farney's Pens, and they were much cheaper than even a local guy here in the state, kind of thing. So do your research. Don't be afraid to start small and then grow. I started on lower end, and then I bought a little further up, and I kept trying. I kept trying different stuff. Don't be afraid to learn about different brands and different filling systems. Don't be afraid to look at vintage. Vintage a little more tricky because they're old and they often need restoration. But if you do some research and don't just buy the first thing off from eBay. Now, I made that mistake, but there are some reputable vintage sellers out there, and if you guys need that info, I'll try to put some links down below, but you feel free to hit me up about that. Don't be afraid to experiment. I've spent money on pens, some of them inexpensive and some of them moderately expensive. Some I've been disappointed with. And expect some disappointments if you're going to try different pens. Not everything is going to fit your fancy. The great thing about this hobby is that there are pens for every price range, every taste, every color preference, every style preference. Every price range. There's just so many that are out there and available. New pens, old pens, they're out there. So you can always experiment. Increased money does not always increase the quality. Sometimes that is true, but not always. I've spent a lot of money on some pens that I was just greatly disappointed on. I spent a lot of money on pens that I was like, oh, that's awesome. That's one of the greatest things I've ever used. I spent money on inexpensive pens that I went, wow, that's surprising. And both new and vintage, by the way. That I've just gone, that was surprising. Some third-tier manufacturers made some awesome pens. And I've had some first-tier manufacturers I went, ooh, that kind of sucked. So, find out what kind of nib you like. Firm, flexible, fine, extra fine. Neither one are my preferences. Medium, broad. Find out what it is that you like and what your uses are going to be. Know that if you fall down that rabbit hole of collecting and really getting into it, you can spend some big money. This hobby does not have to be expensive. You can spend as much or as little as you want. And as long as you get pens that you are happy with and you can have good performance with and fall within your budget, there's no shame in going all out, and there's no shame in being very frugal. It's all personal preference. That's what I like about this whole hobby. Ask others if you can borrow or try their pens. I have made this offer to people I have given free handout pens to. If you want to try something else, I invite you and I welcome you, and I make this offer to them all. You are welcome to come by my house, try any pen in my collection and any ink in my collection, so you can experiment and see what you like. Because the pen I gave you may not be up your alley, but there may be something else that I can steer you towards or let you try that would be something that you would enjoy. Or you're looking for the next level pen, and okay, there's no better way than trying them. And I make that offer to anybody that knows me and has contact with me, and quite honestly is going to be in the regional area, because you're not going to fly in from across the country just to try my pens, let's face it. And know that not all pens are equal. So if you have a bad experience with a pen, not every pen in that brand or in that class or made in that region of the world is going to be that horrible. There's some generalities that I know roughly what kind of quality I'm going to get out of India. And I know roughly what kind of quality I may get out of China. But even in China, you've got some low-end garbage pens, and you've got some high-end, halfway decent pens that are made for other manufacturers. So those are some of the things I would give for advice. And there's actually more to it, but I don't want to make an entire video on that question. Favorite ink, both father and son. Well, I'll be hitting up Matthew here in a little bit for his. He and I have already had the conversation. I already know what his answer will be. I don't know if he remembers what his answers will be, especially because he likes inks that he can't even pronounce. But I've got those, actually bottles of those ink here on my desk, so we'll show you some of those. But for me, my two go-to inks that I really, really like are, number one, Waterman Serenity Blue is my go-to ink. Along with that, though, maybe some Waterman Black or Intense Black as well. But another ink that I really like, that I found before a lot of people apparently had discovered Birmingham pens. I was one of the first people, I think, that really talked about Birmingham pens and their inks. But Birmingham pens Allegheny Arsenal Gunpowder Black was one of my favorites. I liked how it behaved. I liked how it looked. And it wasn't like the really, really dark black. It was more of a gunpowder black, just like the name would suggest. And I kind of liked that ink. And it did very, very well. And if I could get a lot more of it. Unfortunately, Birmingham Pens is no longer a pen store where I could just order some inks and maybe a few other things and get it shipped to me. I'm not going to go there as often anymore because I can't just buy nibs. Because he's changed his business model to doing pen production. Nothing wrong with that, by the way. I think that's good for him. Good, and Nick, good on you. But it just means I'm not going to be buying there as often as I used to when I used to buy pens for gifts, for giveaway, that I would buy different inks and be able to place an order. I'm not going to necessarily spend $165 every time I go purchase from that store and then tack on some ink on top of it, kind of thing. So, just a thought. All right, I told you I'd go get him. Here he is.
Hey.
So here's Matthew, my honeymoon baby I spoke about earlier, who is, how old are you now?
11. I'm gonna be 12 in July.
So, the first video I did with him, I think he was like 7.
Yeah, it was in our living room.
Yeah, something like that. And then we did a video from the pen show in DC, and you can see he's growing up. So He's getting older. So, all right. One of our viewers had a couple of questions, had 18 questions, and he wanted some feedback from you as well. So he specifically asked father and son, he said, about your favorite inks. And I asked you what your favorite inks were, and you had a hard time even pronouncing the ink line.
But I like it. I like that kind of ink, that brand.
Do you even remember? Are you even going to try to pronounce it?
Oroshizuku, I think.
Oh, we got it! Yeah, by Pilot Oroshizuku. All right, now, these are two of them that I know that you like,
Yeah.
and these are the ones I know that you told me that you liked. So, do you even want to try? No?
Oroshizuku Asago?
Asagao.
And then the other one is Oroshizuku Murasaki Shibuku.
Yeah, Murasaki Shikibu.
I was kind of
Hold on,
close.
I think. All right, there they are right there.
I think they're Japanese.
Yes, they are. Made by Pilot Namiki. These are, I know that these are two of his favorites, and I know that he likes kind of Kanpeki as well, but I think these are two that I know that he's liked because the Asagao is one that he has told me. They said, oh, I kind of like that ink, and he wanted to use it more than once. So these are little sample bottles that I managed to get, and I think those are what you had told me were two of your favorites.
Yeah, when he had asked me, those are the first two that came to mind. I was like, the Oroshizaku, because I didn't know how to pronounce it.
Okay. All right. Other question, since I answered on my end, what are some of your interests or hobbies outside of pens?
When it says hobbies, does that mean like what do I do?
Yeah, what do you like to do outside of, when you play with pens, because you never touch them hardly anymore because you don't do any schoolwork at home to speak of.
Yeah.
But outside of playing with pens, what do you like to do?
Well, today we had went to the park. We had played basketball. Oh yeah, then we went fishing. So I like to fish.
Yeah, we went with your big brother and his girlfriend.
Yeah, and then I like to play basketball.
Okay. Gee, because I only see you playing video games and spending time on your little tablet.
Well, that too. I like playing video games. And
You like annoying your family.
no,
Then why do you do it so much?
I don't try.
You don't have to try. You're just an expert at annoying people.
Well, I like to fish, play video games, and basketball, football, or baseball.
Okay. Anything else? I know you like to come and watch a good TV show with me and Mom once in a while.
Yeah, there's two TV shows that I like. The Rookie and The Good Doctor. I like to watch them with my mom and dad.
Okay, what else? Yeah, that's about it.
Yeah, that's pretty much all I do.
Okay. All right, well, there you go. Hopefully that's an answer to at least two of your questions. So, by the way, keep them coming. And he actually has given me an idea that he wants to do for a video. So maybe you'll see him doing a solo video here sometime soon, talking about some of his favorites. If your house was on fire, which pens would you grab first and run? I wouldn't. They're all replaceable. As much as I love my pens, I love my hobby, the lives of my family, even my dogs, and myself are worth far more. And I gotta be honest, my boy is in the fire department. My background is, I got a degree in fire protection and am still a certified firefighter. And used to do that for a living. So we probably would be spending some time trying to kill it before we would abandon the house. It really depends on how bad it got. That's just our family. But I wouldn't think, oh my God, I gotta go get my pens. No, that's what insurance is for. Let's see. Number 16. Did you manage to raise interest in other people outside your family on using fountain pens? Actually, yes. I've given away, I can't count how many pens. I've had people who thought they were great and had more interest, and some have reached out to me for more information. Others have just used them, really enjoyed the pens. Whether they took it any further than that, I don't know. I have run across people who admired the pen that I was using, and I have just given them one. I know I've gotten some subscribers to this YouTube channel that way because I give them a card that says, hey, look, here you go. And I would also give them sometimes a card that said, if you have any more questions, reach out to me. This is for you, kind of thing. But yeah, I've given away a lot of pens, and I don't know how. Some people you only run across once, so I don't know if they've had a huge interest after my encounter with them, because I don't often hear back from folks. Sometimes I do, but seldom do I hear back from them. But if they've got an interest, then great. Question number 17 out of 18. Which pen would you recommend the most to people on having or trying out? All right, I've got a video here that I did on inexpensive pens. I think pens, top pens under $25, I think, or is it under 50? I don't remember which. Go look for it. I'll try to put a link to that here right about now, if I can remember. And that's a good place to start. But there are some really decent pens that are out there at a good price. I'll give you an example. The Faber-Castell Hexo, for the price and its performance, is really kind of unbeatable. It's about $40 or so. A lot of people would recommend the Lamy Safari, which is not a bad investment. I've got some. I've given them away. Matter of fact, I think right here within arm's reach here in my drawer, I've got one that I've got set to give away, just because I won it at a charity auction, and I keep it in my drawer because I haven't decided who I'm going to give it to yet. And I got some more giveaway pens sitting right here. But that's not a bad one. Yeah, the ubiquitous Pilot Metropolitan was one of the first ones that was recommended to me, along with a Lamy 2000. Big price difference between the two, so I tried them both. The TWSBI Eco, people talk about like the TWSBI Go. Step up to the Eco. Forget the Go. Get the Eco. Much better. That's just my personal advice and experience. But those would be some of my first recommendations if you're looking for a next level pen, or even a good initial investment into a pen that you're going to get some good performance out of. Steel versus gold nibs. Thoughts and preferences. Okay. I am not a stickler about what the nib is made out of. I've had some really good gold nibs. I've had some horrible gold nibs. I've had some terrible steel nibs. I've had some incredibly awesome steel nibs. Gold nibs do not necessarily equal better performance. They don't necessarily make it worth the expense. That is my opinion. That has been my experience thus far. I have nothing against gold nibs. Some good 14 and 18 karat nibs I've used have been phenomenal. Like I said, I've also had a few that have been like, eh. When I recently purchased the new Parker 51, I couldn't see spending more than twice the price, 2.5 times the price, to get a gold nib as opposed to a steel nib. And the steel nib did just fine, nice and smooth. A lot of the manufacturers I've dealt with, small time makers. Jim Hines puts out some really good nibs with Yovo that work very, very well. Bach nibs, I've got a Bach titanium nib as well as some other decent nibs that are steel in Bach. It's more of a status symbol and bragging rights for a lot of people to be able to get a gold nib. Flexible nibs, you're probably going to get better flex nibs in gold than you will in steel. And if you can get some of the old Watermen early 1910s nibs that are just absolute wet noodle, like on a 12, Those are some fantastic flex nibs, and they're going to, I think, perform better in gold than some of the nibs I found in steel that are flexible. But, you know, it's all about the writing experience. And if you get a really good, smooth... I'll give you an example. For me, these people who order nibs like they're going to Starbucks and are having this big long name for what they're ordering. When I custom ordered a pen from like Newton Pens, I told Sean Newton, I said, I like boring nibs. I like an ordinary, everyday, medium, buttery, smooth nib. Nothing fancy. Now, I paid the extra money eventually to get a titanium nib in a number 8 titanium nib into that custom pen that I had him make. And it was great. And I liked it. But I like a good, boring, buttery, smooth nib. Period. Whether it's gold or titanium or steel. Long as it writes well, it's comfortable, and it does a great job. I've got some incredibly wonderful Waterman steel nibs that have great performance. I've had a few Chinese pens that have had some great performance for a cheap steel nib. I've had some Schmidt nibs that have been great. I've had some old vintage nibs that have been steel that have been fantastic. But I've also had some gold nibs that have been great. So, you know, it's all depending upon personal preference. And sometimes I'm not willing to spend the extra money when I can get fantastic performance out of a good engineered steel nib as opposed to paying the extra for a gold. Sometimes it's just not worth it. All right, folks, so there you go. Questions and answers. You had questions. Hopefully I had some answers. Hopefully you learned something. Hopefully you gleaned some information that's useful to you. Couple of things for housekeeping. We still have t-shirts available. We still have face coverings available. FountainPenFanatic.com helps spread the word about the URL for this channel. The link to be able to purchase those and at the lowest price really that I can offer them, you'll find that in the description down below. 10% off all your purchases, AntiqueDigger.com. Use discount code TROY. Jim Hines Pens, same thing, 15% off at HinesPens.com. Use discount code TROY for that as well. If you've got more questions, feel free to reach out to me. TroyLaPlante.com is my URL, and on that webpage, you can find links to all my social media. Follow me on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and of course here on YouTube. If you're not a subscriber, why not? Just go ahead and click subscribe. We'll have some more giveaways, by the way, coming up. I've got several more pens. I've got some more videos that I've got in mind coming up. Hadn't always been easy to get videos out. I can't tell you how many times I was interrupted today just trying to get this video out just a few minutes ago, like from Matthew walking in as I'm trying to record. But anyway, hey, thanks for watching. You got more questions, just ask. That's what I'm here for. I made this channel because I didn't get a lot of the answers I wanted when I was looking, when I was experimenting, when I wanted information. That's why I do this channel, is to be able to pour out information to use. And you know, my knowledge level has gone up over the years. My experience has gone up over the years, and I try to take that and give it back to you guys so that you hopefully don't have to go through some of the hassles I went through, make some of the same mistakes that I made, and waste some of the money that I wasted. So, hence this channel. Hey, thanks for watching. Like I said, subscribe, and check us out later for some more videos. Ciao.